This is me, Soumya Mishra from Dharohar, the Heritage Club of SRDAB Public School. Now let me ask you all a question. What does a fairyland look like? Well, many of us would probably think of a place with snow-clad mountains, lush fields, blossoming flowers, and fluttering butterflies. Well, such a place does exist in India, and it is the Indian state of Sikkim. What fascinates me most about this place is its bunch of folk tales. Now, we all have read folk tales and folk stories in our past, especially in the classes of moral education, wherein we would read such folk tales, gather the values, and some of us would apply that in our lives and then move on. That's it. But as a history student, if I get a piece of folktale, I would focus less on the narrative and didactic part. Rather, I would use that as a source of evidence. I would try seeking information about the land the folktale is describing, the community it is focusing upon, and such and such. So many years ago, on the plains of Jolasi, which is the present day, the land between Alipur and Jalpaiguri Duars, there lived a king named Dhanchand. Dhanchand ruled over a group of tribals known as the Koshi tribes. So king was very devoted and humble towards his subjects, and his kingdom was pretty prosperous. But he was less known for his ambitions and his courtesy, and more for his daughter, Princess Jolasi. So his daughter and the plains had the same name, Jolasi. So she was this beautiful princess who was the prettiest of the pretty, and there were many kings who really wanted to marry her. So it was a real concern for King Dhanchand to choose an appropriate husband for Jolasi, because he was concerned that his daughter was so pretty, and she had to go to someone who deserved her. So there was another king who aspired to have Princess Jolasi as his wife, and who was the king of the Lepchas living on the foothills of Sikkim. So you need to understand that hill is an elevated area and plain is just a plain. So it so happened that one day the Lepcha king finally decided to go over and meet King Dhanchand to ask Jolasi's hand for marriage. And so he set off with his troops down the hill towards the plains. And it so happened that when the king was nearby the river Tisa, Princess Jolasi was with her friends, and she happened to see the king himself, and she was immediately in love with him. She had never seen such a handsome man before, and as soon as she saw him, she was spellbound. So she rushed back to her palace, and she told about the king, whom she did not know who he was, but she did tell it to her parents that, oh, I saw this beautiful, handsome man up there near the river Tisa, and I think he's a king, looking at his attire, and I really want to marry him. So at this point, Dhanchand was caught at edge, because there were many kings seeking to marry Jolasi, because she was very pretty, actually very pretty. So Dhanchand was concerned that if he happens to be a king from elsewhere, apart from the proximity areas of the plains, then all the kings living in the proximal distance of the Jolasi plains might rebel against the king, because it was an obvious conception that the proximate distance between the plains and the other kingdoms, Jolasi and other kingdoms, so the kings might have thought that, since we are close to the plains, the Dhanchand should get his daughter married to one of us, right? So Dhanchand was a little bit concerned, but Princess Jolasi was not going down, and she was so reluctant, so adamant that no, I just want that king. He was this beautiful, handsome prince I've never seen before, and I really, really, really want to marry him. So Dhanchand was like, okay, let's see who was the king. And just as they were discussing, they heard that there were troops coming on the way, and Princess Jolasi was just astonished to see the king whom she had seen there near the river Tista walking up to her. And then finally Dhanchand and Jolasi and all of them find out that it was a king of Lepchas living on the foothills who had come to seek Princess Jolasi's hand for marriage. And so this was a two-way thing. So Dhanchand, though he was concerned a bit, but still he bowed down to his daughter's wishes and he got her and the king of Lepchas married together. So the wedding was grand and everybody was invited, even the kings of the proximal distance from Plains Jolasi. And it was grand, it was elaborate, and people enjoyed, people drank the drinks, and everything was just really enormous and beautiful. So as the wedding ceremonies and all ended, now it was time for Princess Jolasi, who was now the queen of Lepchas, to go back up the hills with the king of Lepchas. So as they were returning, they thought that the journey was quite too long, so they decided to halt again near the river Tista. So as they were putting up the tents, all the kings of the kingdoms near the plains of Jolasi, they had actually come up with a plan to attack the king of Lepchas and take away Princess Jolasi. And their intentions were not clear, but it was certain that they did not want her to leave with the king of Lepchas because they felt this was kind of against the nature, because since we are near the plains, Dhanchand should get his daughter married to one of us, not a king up from the hills. So as they were about to rest, the king of Sikkim and Princess Jolasi, the queen of Lepchas, they heard massive blows and arrows and clashes, clings and clangs, and as they rushed outside, they saw that the Lepcha soldiers were fighting off the alliance of a number of soldiers who they did not know, but soon they found out that it was the kings who lived on the distance near the plains of Jolasi. So at this point, the king was off guard. Princess Jolasi was just traumatized that it was her wedding night and she was on her way, and now all this, she was scared of her life and she was scared that it would all come to an end. So they had no other option than to jump into the river Tista and swim offshore on the other bank. So, and for that, since the clothes are really heavy, so all of them had to strip off their robes, their jewelries, and then jump off to the river to swim off at the other side of the bank. So at this point, Princess Jolasi was just infuriated because all of that jewelry was given to her by her mother, but she had to do so to save her life and to escape from this rebellious kings. So she did so and she jumped off, and all the kings and the leftover soldiers, they rushed to the other side of the bank. And so at this point, the kings were like, okay, fine, so they have rushed to the other end, but it's okay, as soon as the sun is up again tomorrow morning, we would go there and we would catch them too and put them to death or whatever. But they did not know that again the king of Lepchas were waiting for them to sleep so that he goes over and attacks them just as they did to him. And so as soon as they see that the flames are going off, king of Lepchas and the soldiers who were a little less in number, so they swam back along with Queen Jolasi, and they attacked and killed the soldiers. And though the soldiers had outnumbered, the alliance soldiers were outnumbering them, they still managed to put them down to death. So at this point, there were only 4 kings left, and they were just shocked to see what happened, and now that they were losing. At this point, Queen Jolasi comes forward, and now the kings too have only one option, that they strip off their clothes and jump into the river Tista and swim to the other bank of the river so that they could save their lives. So at this point, as they're ready, taking off their clothes, and they're hastening off to just swim across the river and go back to the other side just to save themselves from the Lepcha king, Queen Jolasi comes forward and in a very stern voice, she yells out to them that you have done this to me. On my wedding night, you made me strip off my robes and throw off my jewelry gifted to me by my mom. I would not condemn you for this. You will have to pay for this, you and your generation. I curse you that you always remain naked. So this was a big curse kind of thing that happens in movies and all. So as they swam across the river, it so happened that the king settled down on the other side of the river, and their generations still continue to stay almost naked, and they just wear rags. So the curse had actually worked. But later on, as the story continues, when the queen of the Lepchas, Queen Jolasi, returned back to the hills finally with her husband, she wanted to know that which was the appropriate season to sow the seeds of corn. So she did not know, and she wanted to ask it from her mother. So from up the hill, she commanded the river Tista to deliver the message, asking her mother when is the appropriate time to sow the seeds of corn. So river Tista flew downwards towards the plains of Jolasi, and it had delivered the message to Queen Jolasi's mother, and she said that so and so is the season. But now the problem was the river could come down from the hills to the plain, but it could not flow upstream, right? I mean, it could not flow upwards. So now there was a problem, there was an issue that how to deliver the reply to Queen Jolasi, because then we did not have text messages like WhatsApp or Instagram. So it so happened that the mother of Jolasi, she actually commanded her pet bird, who was a dragon bird, she commanded that bird to fly off and deliver the message to Queen Jolasi. So it happened that the bird, it flew, the dragon bird as the Sikkim people call it, she flew up the hills and she delivered the message to Queen Jolasi. And so as the tradition continues, the Lepcha tribes still see that bird annually, and so they realize that okay, now this is the season when we should sow corn. So that is why you see costumes of such dragon birds whenever they harvest or whenever their sowing season comes. So this was a story, pretty fun, pretty exciting. And now let us go to the point where how would I demystify this piece of story as a historian or as a history scholar. So if you look at the geography of the place, then it says that it's a land of hills and the plains, right? So as I mentioned earlier in the video, yes, there is a land similar to the description. It's between Alipur and Jalpaiguri Duars. So there's this plains and there's this hills where the Lepchas tribes still continue to live today. Second thing, the role of Princess Jolasi and the concern of Dhanchand in giving his daughter's hand in marriage. This actually tells a lot about the diplomacy and the strategy that the kings had for building up alliances. So in this case, again, they used women as a sort of diplomatic tool, let's just say. So by giving off his daughter's hand in marriage, King Dhanchand was not only establishing a familial relation, but also a relationship between two kingdoms was being established, right? So this is why he was concerned that if he would not marry his daughter to the nearby kingdoms, then there is a threat of rebel against him from these surrounding areas. So we don't know how far this was true, that there was some king named Dhanchand who actually used his daughter, but this does show that Women were then used as a means of diplomacy between two kingdoms, which is similar to what the Mughals and the Rajputs did. Jodha Akbar, Harkabai, which we have heard many times, she was a Rajput princess married off to Akbar, so this was also a diplomatic connection between the Rajputs and the Mughals. Also, we get an insight of the practices or the customs of the Lepcha tribes. So, if you remember, Princess Jolasi sends off River Tista down to deliver her message, an inquiry that when should I sow corn seeds. So it gives us an information of the staple diet of the Lepchas. And River Tista, the role of River Tista is very important in all of the folk tales of Sikkim, because again, every civilization, every tribe, and every community is somehow attached or attributed to a particular water body. For example, if you look at the civilizations, Mesopotamian civilization, River Tigris, River Euphrates, Chinese civilization, River Yangtze, Yellow River, our Harappan civilization, River Indus, right? So in this case, the Lepchas were attributed to River Tista, and in fact, River Tista is term so sacred even today in Sikkim that many of the parents name their girl child Tista because they think it's such a divine and holy name. So the role of you find River Tista in almost every folk tale of Sikkim, because that shows at how the people are closely attached to River Tista, right? Because Sikkim is a land where River Tista is the major source of water. So then we move on to the customs and the dresses of the people. As you would notice, it says that Princess Jolasi had to take off her robes and her jewelries. So if you look at the typical Sikkimese attire, especially the Lepcha attire, this is true. They actually wear a long robe, first sort of an inner garment and then a long robe, and then the jewelry is especially made of those beads and those headgears. Another thing that you notice is that Princess Jolasi was infuriated when she was asked to throw off her jewelry gifted to her by her mom. So there's actually a concept of Stridhan, which is nothing but the possessions of a queen or a woman gifted to her by her loved ones, her husband or her mother or her family or anybody. So we also get an information that during the wedding days, the queen or the woman was gifted of a particular amount of money or jewelry by her mother. So certain practices similar to that of every other Indian marriage. Also, we would learn that it was the king of Lepchas who was chosen by Princess Jolasi. While we may not be sure whether it was truly the case that there was a princess named Jolasi who married off Lepchas and thrilled by his charm and all, but it is certain that since the Lepchas are the ones telling of the story, they would somehow glorify their own kings, their so-called ancestors. So again, this is all just fictitious, but you need to understand the motive behind the folk tales and the oral traditions. They're passed on from generation to generations, so there are modifications according to the societal needs. That in this case, Queen or Princess Jolasi was married off to the king of Lepchas, so it was a queen of the plains married off to a king of the hills. So there's maybe like a sort of intercaste or intergeographical marriage, whatever we call it. But we may not be sure that 100% this was true. I mean, of course, it may not be true, but there's certain hint that there have been moderations, there have been additions from generations to generations. Now, I'm telling you the story today, and tomorrow, if you say this story to anybody else, you may feel like adding a little bit of spice in it, and that addition of spice itself is again a layer of fictions, again a layer of additions and moderations. So it of course would hinder the original sense of the story. But again, This is the job of a history scholar, that he tries to focus on the veiled part rather than the narrative part. So it was really a fun experience for me to actually test my history skills through a folk tale. So I would surely recommend you this book by George Coturan. He was a professor in St. Joseph's College in Darjeeling. So why my teacher actually asked me to read his book, because he himself roamed about in the forest of the Lepchas to ask the tribes about their stories. So this is an authentic source, but we also need to be sure that he himself writes in his book that he has made a little bit of alterations of some obscene things or some elements that may sound offensive to a particular community. So again, we have to be really cautious while reading such folk tales. So that is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed.